Thank you very much. If my panelists want to come and join me. So I'm Scott from WPP. Welcome. I know we're running slightly late, so we will get this done and then you can have your lunch. I have a great bunch of panelists today. I'm going to push straight on. So I have Tiffany from Salesforce. I have Sandhya from Facebook. I have Mahesh from Disney. I have Naveen from Cisco. And I have Sam from Diageo. So thank you very much for you all joining me today. So the topic of this panel is the evolving digital consumer. And I think it doesn't say that, but I'm going to stick to an Asian perspective, given that we're here in Asia, and that's probably enough to deal with in half an hour with this many panelists. So to kick it off, I wonder if you could all just give me one example or one anecdote which really illustrates an evolving digital consumer from your perspective here in Asia. So maybe I'll start with you, Sam, at the end there.
Right, thanks, Scott. Thanks for starting with me. I thought, given that I was the furthest away, I probably had a chance to do some thinking, but great to be here. Thanks also to InnovFest. I think this has been an amazing event. There's sort of certainly a lot of people. For those of you who don't know, I'm going to get to the question, Scott, don't worry, but a little bit about Diageo. We're the world's largest drinks company. That's alcoholic beverages, famous for brands like Johnny Walker, Guinness, Smirnoff, and the like. I hope, and I know the guy from Tencent asked who uses Tencent. I hope there's a few of you who've bumped into some of our brands. Our purpose
probably bumped into other things after using your brands.
Well, I hope not, because it's important that we do consume responsibly. Absolutely. Our purpose is to celebrate life every day, and again, I think that hopefully through everything we're doing, we're living by that. So where do you start in relation to an evolving consumer? I think, for us, one of the world's largest drinks companies, we've got brands in 180 countries around the world. The key for me is to be relevant to consumers in every single market. And in years gone by, we might have been able to be relevant by taking a brand from one place, inserting it into another, kind of advertising and making it available. But today, I don't think that's good enough. Consumers need to understand what our brands stand for and whether or not we can be relevant in their lives. An example from that is Smirnoff, and I just use 2 minutes here to explain a little bit about it. I mean, Smirnoff is the largest spirits brand in the world by volume. And it's been a challenge for us to sort of take that global popular mantra and make it relevant to today's more discerning consumers. And so what we've done is to give Smirnoff a purpose. And the purpose is that we're open. This is an exclusive brand for everyone, and that we're open to all consumers, no matter what shape or size you are. And the Open campaign has really stood for the LGBT industry by profiling, personalities from that industry and demonstrating who they are and why they relate to our brand. So we wouldn't have been able to do that years ago. We would have been telling, if you like, a global story, and now we're telling a much more intimate story that has the purpose of our brand at the heart of our communication. I'm not sure if that's too long, Scott.
I think that's great. So Naveen, from Cisco's perspective, you got any anecdotes that you've seen around the region?
Yeah, so it's, many of you would think Cisco, consumer, and you probably think that doesn't really match because we're an enterprise company. But actually what we do is we enable a lot of the consumer industries to actually, where technology fades into the background, and all that happens is that the experience comes to the foreground. So an example yesterday was Vivian Balakrishnan at the dinner last night was talking about, the flower dome in Singapore, where it's amazing amount of flowers all in one place. But to get all of that experience happening in one place, you need a lot of technology behind the scenes, so that when you go there, you actually don't see the technology. Everything is just the experience. So for us, we enable retail industries in the same way. If you want to have a highly personalized experience, online, offline, wherever you are, that can be enabled. Healthcare, same thing. You want to be able to have healthcare on demand where you are, and according to the right treatment plan, you can enable that through that. Data is a big issue. Your data sits on public clouds, on private clouds. You have no control where it is. we enable the safe and secure transmission of data so that you're in control as a consumer. If you're in the creative industries, we enable collaboration so that you can co-create and you can actually build things together. Many times you don't even notice that Cisco is involved, but that's exactly how we like to do it. We like to play in the background, we like to enable the experience, and that's our role.
Great. What about Disney?
Well, you know, the Walt Disney Company has 4 major brands. There's Disney, there's Pixar, there's Marvel, and there's Lucasfilm. The amazing thing about the experience of the consumer with the brand is how local it's getting. So if you take an example of Marvel, since the last 10, 12 years of Marvel films, superheroes are becoming more and more embraced by consumers. And I was in a screening of The Avengers in Hindi about a month ago, and I was amazed to see the resonance and the recognition of superheroes even in a Bollywood context. So you can see a lot of change, and it comes back to the fact that storytelling transcends technology. And you know, this is going to be the 90th year of Mickey, and over 90 years, the Walt Disney Company has seen several tsunamis of transformation. You know, whether it's the rise of television, the rise of DVDs, before that VHS, and with great storytelling and brands, you transcend technology. And Marvel is the recent example of Marvel. Brings that to light.
Great. How about Facebook?
When you think of Facebook, you think of Facebook, WhatsApp, Messenger, and Instagram. And you know, in Asia Pac, we're lucky, with the exception of China, that we have great presence across the region. What we're seeing is really, and you talked about storytelling and technology, what we're seeing is consumption is moving heavily to video on our platforms. The consumer of today is consuming a ton of video on our platform in terms of a format. If you see the stats, I think Asia APAC is going to have 1.2 billion video viewers by 2020. That number just keeps increasing. But what's more interesting is how they're consuming that video content. It's moving to ephemeral video, which is just what we're seeing on Instagram stories on our platform, for example, is just exploding. What used to be 100 million stories on our platform in a year has become around 300 million stories being shared on just our platform. So that's like a huge number. So it's become a vertical video format. People are sharing it in a short bite-sized format. So that poses challenges to brands when they think about how they want to communicate to their consumers, because they're consuming it differently. The second thing is just messaging. This region is all conversational commerce. So if you look at the region itself, and especially Southeast Asia, social commerce in Thailand, around 51% of all commerce in Thailand is supposed to be social commerce. So that's again a different way, that's again driven by consumer behavior, which is people are discovering brands through, say, Line or Instagram or WhatsApp. We surveyed businesses in India, and 80% of small businesses in India and Brazil said they use WhatsApp to actually sell. So there's implications here for brands and for businesses, because your consumer and where they're spending their time is changing.
Great, thank you. And Tiffany, from Salesforce perspective.
Yes, so I would say this. I'd say I've been coming into the region now for about 12 years. And I remember 10 years ago really seeing a lot of developers and businesses driving towards moving this millennial consumer down this digital path. And not that they needed to have them convert, if you will. They were sort of born digital. So, you know, you'll have a generation that has never stepped foot into a bank, you know, or that they communicate via social, or, you know, before Uber was Uber, you were able to call taxis in Singapore and have commerce and do things from a WhatsApp perspective or whatever it might have been. And so I'd say this, that I think the definition of consumer has significantly changed over the last couple of years. And I'd say the consumer is far more in control of the way that they engage with brands, and really expecting and commanding a certain kind of experience that they have. And so with all of these companies, right, whether it's a Facebook experience or Cisco powering it in the background, or whether it's an experience with a brand, at the end of the day, they are making decisions very, very quickly, and they're voting with their loyalty, with their wallet. And so I'd say that in this region specifically, I think it's a great hotbed for startups to drive a lot of that digital that is getting getting copied actually in other regions of the world. It isn't the reverse. It is actually coming out of the APAC ASEAN region and really being adopted elsewhere.
I'll come back to that. So thank you. One of the points you mentioned, Sandhya, was around what this means for media consumption and content consumption, which I think is important to all of the companies here. Obviously, Disney is a media company, a content producer. So what has this massive advance in digital technology, different ways of consuming content, what's that meant, A, for your content, but B, for your business model, which traditionally had very clear windows and clear ways of consuming?
Well, as I mentioned, I think the business model has been evolving across decades, and this transformation is an important transformation. This pivot to accessible content on time, anytime you want it, in any place you want it. That's really important. I think, as I mentioned before, if you have great storytelling, you can transcend these, and consumers, if the consumer has a desire to see the content, they will find it. Right now, our content is available, widely distributed across different platforms, across linear channels. We've announced that we're going to come with our own app next year. And so now it will be available in one single place. And that transformation is an important transformation for us. I think eventually when we look at digital and we look at technology, we look at different ways of taking those to enrich both the creation of the content, but also distribution and accessibility of the content. So fundamentally, if the storytelling is great and the brands are solid, we will embrace technology and make it available to consumers as they want it, when they want it.
Great. Now, Naveen, you mentioned already that Cisco's often the technology in the background here powering these consumer experiences. What can we look forward to? So if we think about the changes we've seen in the past couple of years of how we consume media, how we consume content, a lot of it's driven by your technology and others. What's coming down the line, and what's the consumer experience going to look like in a few years' time?
So one thing I wanted to highlight is, if you look at the threats that are emerging in the landscape, right, around adoption. So if you want to adopt more video or more content or more investments into new technologies, it's typically dampened by threats. That typically cyber threats are a big issue that hit us worldwide. Some numbers that people don't necessarily all realize. There are 20 billion threats a day. That's 20 billion threats a day. We monitor 20 billion threats a day. And just for context, there are about 6.7 billion Google searches a day. So we monitor about 3.2, 3.3x number of Google searches a day in threats. And these threats are all coming through encrypted traffic. Most of the internet traffic is about 75% of the internet traffic is encrypted. And malware sits in encrypted traffic and spreads throughout your network. And typically, malware sits in your network for about 6 months to 7 months before you even know you've been breached. So, in content industries, there have been high-profile hacks. Like, for example, Sony was a big high-profile. Now, that can destroy the market capitalization of firms. It's not just a case of let me just fix the hack and let me just solve my system problem. Market capitalization gets affected of industries. So what we've done is we've started to look at how can we find malware in encrypted traffic without decrypting it, but doing it at line speed on the internet. So doing it literally at the speed of light on the internet. So you could be on a video call, you could be streaming a movie, but we're identifying packets of data that are in encrypted traffic, isolating them, putting them in a sandbox, exploding them, putting them aside, and then putting these packets back in line, and you don't see any impact into the way the video is streaming. Now, this is all happening while your experience is going on. You don't need additional software, you don't need additional plugins, it's all happening in the background. That's an example of how we do it. And we actually have that technology now, and we've actually published the patents for it, and we've actually published a white paper releasing it to everyone in the world so they can also implement it. So it's kind of open source now, and these are the kind of things that we do. And those are applications of AI, machine learning, because no human can look at 20 billion threats a day. But these are reality cases that are actually into our technology products. As you ship a box out, it's built into the hardware. So that's kind of the stuff that we're doing, but there's many more on the horizon as well.
Great. Now, Facebook, my ex-boss, who's no longer with the company, he used to often refer to Facebook as a media company, which used to drive everyone at Facebook crazy, and they used to come back saying they're a technology company. So I won't get into that argument, but obviously you're a platform that does distribute media. So what's this huge sort of streaming and access to broadband meant from a media perspective at Facebook?
So I'd go back to what I talked about, which is the consumer behavior that we're seeing on our platform, which is huge consumption of just interactive content and video, right? So the way we think about it is twofold. What are the implications that it has for our clients? And two, what are the implications that it has for our users on the platform? And we have 2 billion plus on our platform every month. So the way we thought about it was, which is why you see products that help customers engage with us, users engage with us on the platform. So video consumption has led to a bunch of formats that we introduced, which is you can either consume bite-sized content. So stories is a great example of ephemeral content that's, that disappears in 24 hours. But what we've also realized is that people want interactive content as well. So live and 360, were product formats that we adopted because people wanted interaction, and we call that lean forward. Lean back is when they want to engage with us on the platform, and that's where Watch comes in. We announced the launch of Watch in the US, and since then we've made a lot of improvements to Watch. There's been some shows that we've tied up with and some that we've commissioned. But if you saw the latest updates to Watch, what we want to make is we want this to be a community experience. So people are consuming video, but you consume it with your friends, and we've been bringing a sense of community to it. And the initial reactions to that have been super positive. So that's how we think about it, both for our users and what the implications are for our clients.
Great. Now, earlier, Tiffany, you were talking about innovations you've seen here that are sort of leading and then passing back to the West. And that's one of the things I always love talking to my sort of bosses and peers back in the UK and in New York to just show examples of things that are where Asia's taking the lead. One of the ones I talk about a lot, obviously, is e-commerce. So I think China is definitely the epicenter of e-commerce for the world, and it's a topic where Asia takes the lead. Obviously, Salesforce has a lot of the technology behind that and drives that with your Commerce Cloud. So how do you see e-commerce in Asia versus some of the other markets you look at, and how do you see the market developing?
Yeah, and I think that goes back to what I said a little bit ago, that the definition of a consumer or customer is changing rapidly. And so you not only have customers who are conducting commerce now more in a mobile environment versus potentially in a retail store, especially when you get into tier 2, tier 3, tier 4 cities where the only thing they have is mobility. So we see a lot of m-commerce increasing. And as well, just the entire engagement of I want to find a customer, I want to conduct commerce with a customer, and then I have to support that customer. The full life cycle and the lifetime value of someone who becomes somebody who conducts commerce with a brand all the way through is very complicated. But the thing that gets very interesting for me is when I say the customer is changing, that we're also seeing this explosion of commerce between things becoming the customer, right? So whether it is IoT being powered by somebody like Cisco or others, where at the end of the day, it's a thing in a factory on a machine that says I'm out of widgets and I have 100 more that I need to produce and I only have 20 widgets. I need to put out an order for, another 80. And so commerce is now happening between things and between humans and things and humans and things getting involved. And so it gets very interesting on the scale of what kind of commerce you're actually talking about. Because humans will conduct commerce, but now you have things and apps and bots and AI and natural language, all these things pushing what's happening from a commerce perspective. So for us, it's just fantastic to be at the center of all that, of all those touches from a customer perspective.
Great. Now, I'm sure, Sam, when you listen to this is something that you deal with on a regular basis. I guess when Tiffany says customer, normally in the old days when someone said customer, that meant, a retail channel, a supermarket or whatever for your brand. But now the word customer can mean a consumer as well, and especially in a market like China, which I think you just came back from today, right? So what does it mean for Diageo, for a brand like Diageo? How are you changing your business now that you can sell directly to consumers on platforms like JD and Tmall?
Oh, I think, especially in China, the shift has been extraordinary, and frankly, we are still learning, which is part of our culture. I think if you think that the answer's in front of you, I think that you're missing something. I think the exciting opportunity for China for us, and traditionally alcoholic beverages are have quite low penetration online. And hence, you can engage online. We can serve the right content up. We can find the right consumer, and we can, if you like, inspire interest. But until we can give them an experience of our product, it's really difficult for us to close that purchase cycle. So with the evolution in China to online and offline, that kind of seamless relationship between the two, we can take all of the content that we're developing, all of the interest that we create online, and then drive them into an offline location for a bespoke, if you like, personalized experience. For our business, I think that's got massive implications in relation to how we drive penetration and obviously, all of our brand building efforts. So I think that the O2O phenomenon in China is interesting. I think it's going to spread more regionally, so that we've seen it in the US a little bit and starting to evolve outside of the US in Southeast Asia. But for us, where experience is such an important component of the purchase decision, that's a massive opportunity.
Yeah, no, I think that makes a lot of sense. And I remember when I lived in Shanghai, I could highly recommend the Johnny Walker House. I still have it there, but it was a great example of blending technology and that offline sort of
Absolutely.
highly bespoke experience for a great brand. Now, talking about offline as well, I mean, Disney, you're renowned from a retail perspective for having these incredible physical stores, and obviously your parks business is also a physical experience. What's technology meant for you from a retail and from the park perspective? How are you embracing technology and offering consumers different experiences there?
Well, there has been a pretty significant history of technology in the parks. We have an entire Imagineering division whose job is to create the theme park rides. There are a number of patents that the Walt Disney Company has in areas that interface between entertainment and technology. There are tons of examples. As consumers evolve, and as the park experience changes, for example, we now have a magic band that you can use, and that magic band allows you to be used across the park, right? From unlocking your hotel room door to ordering, to buying a gift in a gift store to, taking part in a theme park ride with a fast pass. So there are a number of things that happen on an ongoing basis with technology. The interesting thing is to make the technology hidden and to make the experience far more driven by the story. And that's the biggest challenge and opportunity for us. And that's what I think the Walt Disney Company does really well, is it puts stories and characters in front and center of the consumer and uses technology and leverages technology to enrich the experience. And that's really important for us, whether it's through the theme park rides that I mentioned or through things like Magic Band. And now there's an additional layer that's come up, which is as we come into countries like Asia, how do we remain authentically Disney, but also distinctively Chinese, for instance, in a China theme park? So there are different angles to the experience with the Walt Disney Company, and a lot of them are driven, and there is a huge backdrop of technology, both in creating the content and in making it accessible. But the most important thing is it should remain hidden. The consumer should experience the storytelling more seamlessly.
So it creates the magic.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Well, but I think, at events like this, what's really the opportunity is for people in the audience that are walking around the floor is thinking about the Magic Band as an example. Is it applicable in your industry? So, using it in hospitality as an, one of the guys who was on the team on the Magic Band has now taken it to cruise lines, and how do they monitor what people are doing, and can they get into their room, the same kind of feeling. And so, it's how do you take these examples and apply it to your business in the consumer space? And it's just spinning those ideas and saying, does it work in banking? Does it work in hospitality? Does it work in healthcare or education? So I think that's what's so exciting about events like this.
Yeah, great. Well, you've taken me to my next topic, which is, I wrote down the words digital transformation, which is one of those buzz phrases that you hear a lot from consultants, and they normally have 80 slides to explain what it means. I'll try and do it in one English sentence. So in my mind, it's essentially how brands and companies are reacting to these consumers and how they're using technology to sort of improve and change their business. So if you think about that from your own businesses, or for those of you who are servicing clients like Salesforce and Cisco, what do you see in your client base? So how do you see maybe more traditional companies and traditional brands adopting technology and getting with this evolving consumer? So Naveen, how do you see that? It must be a core part of what Cisco does.
Yeah, no, it is. And in terms of the buzzword, you're right, it is a buzzword. But the main point is that every company has its own unique path. So that means if you are a bank, even if you're a bank, you could be the incumbent, you could be a challenger, you could be a fintech, you could be whatever it is, but you will have a different path to each other, even in the same industry. And then you've got multiple industries, and each industry is evolving in a different rate. So the best I could say is do your own thing, right? But maximize your customer experience, your consumer experience. I've seen some good examples. For example, in retail, right? So in retail, we've worked with big retail stores that really want to get closer to their customers and who walk in the store. They're really high-value customers. So we've actually developed, using our Meraki infrastructure, which is wireless infrastructure. It tags basically individuals who are signed up to that company, that retail store. And when they walk in the store attendants have an Apple iWatch, and the iWatch literally buzzes, and it gives you a quick profile of whoever just walked in the store. So they can immediately go in and greet them and give them the level of service they want. If you look at banks, we've worked with banks that have said, the most painful thing in a bank that they can think about doing is, like, for example, applying for a loan. Because you need to fill out like 55 different pages, you need to then make an appointment, you need to go to the bank, you then need to print out all those documents, show your ID and all that stuff. So what we've done is we've built in applications with the bank to say, you can fill out all your forms at home on the app. You can then say, what's my nearest store or my nearest retail bank? And then you set an appointment, like a ticketing system, say 10:15 on Friday morning, I'm going to walk in. You go straight to the counter, you get a counter allocated. The person behind there has already printed the forms out and has got your ID, and all you do is sign and walk out. So depending on what your
Which bank's that?
Yeah, well, I know. I'll tell you afterwards.
To all the banks.
It's actually, and it's not in an advanced economy like Singapore or somewhere in Europe or North America. It's in a very emerging economy in Southeast Asia where we worked on stuff like that. So it just depends, and I think that every company has its own path, and I don't think we should be prescriptive about it, because everyone wants a different customer experience at the end of the day.
Sure, that's a core part of what Salesforce does as well, obviously. So how do you see clients using your technologies and products to adapt to this?
I would say that almost the same example, we're probably powering the front end of that. But, so we do, one of the examples that we have now is with Adidas or Adidas, depending where you are in the world. Same thing happens where the customer will walk in, it recognizes this at the app, it'll see the shopping history, it will then say, well, I know that Tiffany is a size 8 US, she likes these sports, or she likes this athlete, and it will actually light up the shoe display to show which shoes are right for me based on the sport I like and what they have in my size. And and in many ways it'll have a robot that will greet you as well and actually take facial recognition and take you through the full process. Now, is it all the way there yet? Is it worldwide? Is it in every Adidas store? No. But this is where retail is moving towards and trying to drive these experiences. But I'd say there's two things that are happening. One is a company will digitize their back office, like how do we actually modernize our infrastructure? That is very different than digital transformation.
Sure.
Digital transformation is, and so that makes a difference. And so if you start from the customer in, which everyone has as examples, if you start from the customer in, that's where business models really get impacted, whether it's a bank or a liquor store or an event at Disney or having a movie night with friends online, right? That is starting from a customer, and that's very different business models. So we are seeing some amazing examples of customers embracing how can we make the experience super unique for an individual without it being creepy.
Sure,
because
that's
like
the fine boundary.
Yes, there's fine
right?
boundaries, absolutely.
Right, and Sanya, obviously Facebook as a platform is helping marketers transform the way they do marketing. What do you see at the
And I'd go back to
cutting
what
edge
Tiffany
there?
talked about, which is really around how do you define digital transformation. I used to be a banker before I joined Facebook. I was a banker for 15 years. Back then, I would think about digitizing products or services. So how do I get less people to call my call center and log on online because it was cheaper? Or how do I digitize my branches? Or how do I launch an e-wallet? What I wasn't spending time thinking about was what was my customer actually spending time on? Where was my consumer? Was he on his mobile the entire time? And in which case, how do I actually think about distribution transformation rather than have somebody sit at a MRT selling credit cards, right? So I think, so what I see today in my day job, and I'm super fortunate to be doing the work that I do because I get a ringside view of everyone from startups across the region, like a Grab and a Gojek, to very traditional banks, of which I used to be an employee of before. So what I see are people are at various stages of how they want to work with us. They're people that actually co-create products for us, with us, because they're listening to their consumer and they're listening to their needs, and they're coming to us and saying, hey, we see this behavior. Can you help us create something which will address it? But equally, we also have the other end of the spectrum where there's someone that says, hey, I have to put 10% of my budget on digital. Can you help me do that? So it's a journey. We get to see all of them. But I think the good news is that this region is so vibrant and so dynamic that this is not being on mobile and being on platforms like ours and many others is not something you can ignore if you want to run a business. The second bit I'd talk about is just SMBs, which are powering economies in Southeast Asia especially. Those guys totally get it, and many of them start their businesses on platforms like ours, and we see them innovate on our platforms, and we learn from them.
Great. Well, thank you very much. I'm afraid we're up for time now, so thank you to you all for joining me, and best of luck for the rest of the conference. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.